My guess is that the reason President Obama decided to spend the first weekend of spring break in Brazil was not mainly to visit the 130-foot-tall statue of Christ the Redeemer atop Corcovado Mountain in Rio de Janeiro. But if I were president, I'd be looking for all the help I can get. The list of cataclysms around the world that need redeeming gets longer by the day. The showdown between UN-mandated forces and Colonel Gaddafi in Libya, the crackdown by Saudi troops in Bahrain, and the escalating confrontation in Yemen have pushed the enduring hotspots, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran, off the front pages, at least for the moment. The continuing turmoil in Tunisia, the ongoing bloodbath in Côte d'Ivoire, the list of political hotspots could continue. The natural world has created its share of cataclysms as well. Most of us have already forgotten the damage inflicted upon Western Russia last summer by record-breaking heat and hundreds of wildfires, which together killed more than 50,000 people and decimated the nation's wheat crop. The Christchurch earthquake in February was the second deadliest in New Zealand's history. In nearby Australia, Queensland experienced the worst drought in a century, followed last month by the worst flooding in 120 years. 10 days ago, the people of Japan joined the company of those who suffer hugely from nature's indifference. The most powerful earthquake on record in Japan generated a devastating tsunami, and together they precipitated the worst nuclear disaster in the nation's history. Even as we gather for worship this morning, the scope of the calamity continues to unfold. Police now estimate that at least 15,000 people perished in Miyagi Prefecture alone. We've watched ceaseless videos and viewed countless photos of the devastation in Japan. Some of them have become iconic. The phalanx of dark water tops the seawall, tossing cars and trucks ahead like toys, and crushing an ocean-going ship, cartoon-like, under the bridge. The red-haired woman sits distraught in front of the rubble she once called home. Desperate people plead for food and blankets. Hapless dogs await rescue. A thriving town of 10,000 reduced to a mudflat. Battalions of rescuers, plumes of smoke, lists of the missing, lines of the dead. In the areas hardest hit by the tsunami, two sensations doubtlessly predominate, as they did in New York City on the day after 9/11, the smell and the silence. In the tsunami-ravaged areas of Japan, fetid-smelling ocean mud covers everything, a grim reminder that human beings do not control the sea, where in eons past we made our home. With electricity gone and batteries dead, silence pervades, a sobering reminder that the thin veneer of civilization can easily succumb to forces beyond our control. Theologians and moral philosophers distinguish between two types of evil: moral evil and natural evil. Moral evil is caused by willful human actions, such as murder, rape, genocide, and terrorist attacks. Moral evil encompasses the kind of human actions that need never happen at all. One can imagine, for example, a world where 11-year-olds were never raped by gangs of men, and genocidal tyrants never massacred his citizens, and leaders voted out of office never reacted with violence. Natural evil, on the other hand, is caused by what insurance documents call acts of God, such as earthquakes, floods, and droughts. These are not consequences of human action, at least not directly, but rather are intrinsic to the cycle of life on this planet, in this universe. Sometimes the earth quakes and tsunamis wreak havoc, or chromosomes get damaged and cancers grow. As a result, human beings suffer and die. That's just the way life is. An earthquake reminds us of the tenuous place we occupy in the order of things. The natural world does not endorse our decided preference for human life over other forces of nature, be it an earthquake or a cancer. As humans, we define these forces as a form of evil because of the way they impinge upon us. Nassim Nicholas Taleb calls the relationship between the low probability of something like a 9.0 earthquake happening and the dramatic consequences if it does, the great asymmetry. In his book titled The Black Swan, he suggests that these highly improbable black swans occur more often than we think, and they influence our lives substantially. Most of the time, Taleb says, we blithely peer into the future as though we are good at making predictions, which we are not. History does not crawl, Taleb insists. It makes jumps, driven by the tyranny of the singular, the accidental, the unseen, and the unpredicted. Taleb suggests that we should spend less time assuming the future will be like the past and more time pondering the improbable. Events like the terrorist attack of 9/11 and the stock market crash of 1987, two exemplary black swans, in his view, may be unlikely, but their effects are so profound that it's worth thinking beforehand about how we would deal with such events in the future. The same is true of earthquakes and tsunamis and hurricanes and blackouts and so on. How do we survive if calamity strikes? How do we bounce back? While no one can possibly get ready for every potential worst-case scenario in life, it helps to make a few simple preparations. Let me confess at the outset that this is not one of my strong suits. For the most part, I was born sunny side up. I don't spend my copious free time poring over maps of how high the water would rise if a Category 4 hurricane hit our region, or scenarios of what would happen if the bridges and tunnels to Manhattan were shut down indefinitely. Nonetheless, we have lived through 9/11 and the blackout of 2003. Here's a question. Do you have enough food, water, medicine, batteries, blankets, and other necessary supplies for the people and pets in your home to survive comfortably if you were confined there for a week without electricity or water? If I asked for a show of hands, my guess is that not 1 hand in 10 would be razed. Mine would not be one of them. As bad as the devastation in Japan has been, it could have been worse. After an abysmal performance by emergency responders to the Kobe earthquake in 1995, Japanese officials made preparation for the next disaster a priority. Did they adequately prepare for the unprecedented scale of a 9.0 earthquake and a 30-foot tsunami, as well as the subsequent failure of all backup systems at the Fukushima nuclear power plant? No. But it's clear that planning and drills, as well as stockpiling of supplies, have made a difference. Japan's ability to rebound from this epic tragedy, however, depends less on the capacity of Japan's emergency warehouses than it does on the character of the Japanese people and the compassion of people around the globe. Though Japan enters this crisis more or less tied with China as the world's second-largest economy, Japan finds itself in tenuous financial condition. Here are a couple of concerns. In the months and years ahead, Japan will need to spend the equivalent of hundreds of billions of dollars rebuilding, a significant portion of which will come from the Japanese government. Total government debt in Japan already stands at about 225% of their GDP. In the U.S., by comparison, federal debt stands at about 93% of GDP. In Japan, most of this debt is held by Japanese people and institutions rather than by foreigners, which means that restructuring the debt would reduce domestic consumption, further weakening the economy. Another factor in the economic equation is the graying of Japan, which has about twice as many seniors, percentage-wise, as the U.S. or Europe. In economic terms, the bottom line is this: Japan's problem has become everybody's problem. When a tsunami washes through Sendai, manufacturing plants around the globe grind to a halt. The decision by G7 finance ministers to intervene in the currency markets indicates that economic support has already begun. It must continue in many different ways. The same is true in moral terms. Japan's problem is everybody's problem. If being human means anything at all, it certainly means that we come together when bad things happen, rather than falling apart into competing factions.